Lucian Freud was one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. David Dawson was his assistant, model, and friend for the last 2 decades of his life. In 2000, he started photographing Freud both at work and in the world. Those intimate and revealing photographs are collected in a new book. It is called A Painter's Progress, a portrait of Lucian Freud. David Dawson joins me now. Also here, John Richardson. He is an author, art historian, and longtime friend of Freud. I am pleased to have both of them here because we and I've known you for so long, and because of all the biographies, all the editions, and the Picasso biographies. Tell me where you put, or where you think the art world puts, Lucian Freud.
Difficult question to answer, but of course Lucian was sort of one of a kind. I mean, he wasn't part of a school. He was unique. And you can't put him with the modernists, you can't put him with the impressionists or any other group that there might have been. He was one of a kind, and he was just a very great artist who, to my mind, was the great portraitist of his day. And he also had this extraordinary feeling, maybe inherited from his grandfather, for perceiving people's personalities and bringing them out.
His grandfather, obviously.
His grandfather, yes. And Lucian revered his grandfather, but not for being inventing psychoanalysis, but for his earlier work on eels and newts and sea things. And he was tremendously proud of his grandfather for having discovered the secret of how to tell a male eel from a female eel.
When did you first meet him, John?
I met him when I was 17 and he was 18 in the Slade School at Oxford. He just came in to take a look at it. Slade School had been sent down there from London during the Blitz. And somehow or other, we became friends almost instantly. And I went up to meet him in London. He said, "Come and have a drink at the Café Royal." And I went there, and there was Lucian, standing on one leg like a stork. And all the old people in the Café Royal, the sort of Wildian leftovers, saying, "That's Freud's grandson, that's Freud's grandson." And Lucian was sort of steadily standing on one leg. And rather disturbed when we came and disrupted his this great sort of effect he was having on the bar.
And it was a lifelong friendship and correspondence?
Lifelong friendship, but I lived in France for a long time, and so I didn't see him for 10 years at a time. And then right at the end of my life, I saw a lot of him, and he did a portrait of me.
At the end of his life?
At the end of his life, because he always wanted to do my portrait. And we'd been talking about it for years and years and years. And finally he said, "Okay, how long can you be in London at a time?" I was over here in New York working. Right. And I said, "Well, I could spare 9 or 10 days, but then I had to get back to work." And he said, "Well, I'll try doing a portrait. I've never done anything so quickly." I promised to come every single day for 9 days, and I did. And you just come back from New York with these tiny canvases.
Yeah.
And one of them was to paint the Queen on, because he couldn't paint a big portrait of the Queen. I mean, that would have required 18 months. Right. And he had only, 7 or 10 sittings with her. And so he rehearsed a little bit on me, and so I sat there for 9 mornings in a row, and as he did the last brushstroke, the cab was outside waiting to take me to the airport.
Wow. I want to introduce you to David Dawson, who I've only met once in my life, but it was one of the most interesting days of my life, where I went to meet Lucian Freud, and we met at the studio, and you were there.
Yeah.
Then we walked over to have lunch, the three of us,
Yeah.
and it was just the most engaging conversation with an artist I'd ever had. Then we went back to the studio. I pleaded valiantly that we should have a conversation. He thought about it. We talked about it, and then he said, in the end, he said, I can't do it.
No.
But it was a wonderful evening, and I want to begin with this relationship between the two of you.
Yeah.
You were working with his dealer.
I did. When I graduated from the Royal College in London, I studied painting at the Royal College of Art. I had a job 3 mornings a week with James Kirkman, right, who at the time was Lucian's dealer in London, and that's how I met Lucian. And from first meeting Lucian, he took my phone number, and then he phoned me every morning.
Yeah. To talk about
anything. I think he just was interested. He was interested in people, and if he liked someone, he just would want to know everything about that person. And then Lucian and James came to the end of their agreement in their with James representing him. So I just then went with Lucian every single day. And also around the same time, then Bill Aquavella...
his dealer here in New York.
Yeah, a great New York dealer. Lucian showed him the paintings in the studio, and the rest is history. There it was.
And what would you do for him?
Everything. So when I put everything, but to start with, it was very much a runaround boy. So it was going to buy the paint, get the canvases,
set him up to
paint, run errands, take letters. He was very keen on writing notes to people, and then I would go and deliver them by hand.
And you'd have breakfast in the morning.
We'd have breakfast
and
in
then
the
lunch.
To begin with, it was much more sporadic, and I would just be there when needed. I happened to be living quite close to him, so a 10-minute walk away, so it was a very practical way.
What's interesting is that you didn't go home and take notes and write everything down, knowing you were in the presence of a great painter.
Yeah.
You later took photographs, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But the relationship deepened, and he called you an honorable man, which is what he liked so much.
Yeah. I was really taken with him, and he was great company, and I really valued my growing friendship with him, and the idea of then running home and writing about that seemed to me not the right thing to do, and I didn't want it. I wanted it to be, that's something in my life that's part of me now, is my friendship with Lucian, and the idea of then running home and trying to write down what we just said or what was happened, I thought, no, you just let...
But you gave up your career in part for Lucian.
In part, yeah, I did put him first. But I thought I really was mesmerised when I first walked into his studio. By the paintings. I mean, I walked in, because Lucian was very, in his flat where the studio was, this was in Holland Park, the doors were always closed in every room.
Yeah.
So the studio was a very private space. So after meeting him after about 2-3 weeks, he said, "Oh, just pop into the studio with me." And he opened up the door, and there was the first big painting of Lee Bowery, naked, with his leg over the red chair. And I just thought that was the most remarkable event that happened to me. I mean, I just felt there was such concentration in this studio, and there was a real sense of purpose. He was 69. I really felt he was at the top of his game here, and I just said, I understand what he's doing. I was just mesmerised by it, and I felt I understood him, and I felt, I can help along here. I get it. I get,
And two things happened. First, you started taking photographs.
Very quiet. Yes, I did.
Quietly in the beginning.
Quietly. I mean, it was 6 years before I sat for him.
Yes.
So I'd known him for 6 years, and then as we started this one painting, it was called Sunny Morning, 8 Legs. I really did want to document how this painting was being made, and that's when I would just have my little camera and I would just, for myself, just photograph the progress of the painting. A few years later, then he was doing a portrait of David Hockney.
Right.
And I was with Hockney in the studio, and the painting had just finished. So I was photographing Hockney with the portrait, and as I pressed the button, Lucian just walked through the doorway. He'd been out in the kitchen doing something. And because it was film in those days, I didn't know what was on the camera. And not until you get your film back developed, you know what you've got.
Yeah.
So suddenly there was this photograph with Hockney and Lucian walking through the door. And Lucian was the one that really found this very exciting, this photograph, and it was Lucian that pushed that forward a bit.
So you began to take a lot of photographs.
A few, but again, it was always very much about trust and respect and the feel of our daily lives. It was about, this is how it worked in the studio.
But it was in the studio as well as outside the studio.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Queen.
Yes,
you took a photograph of the Queen when you went to do this.
But I thought you could not take a photograph of this event. I mean, this was in St James's Palace, and Lucian had chosen it was the Restoration Studio, a very quiet, nondescript room, but with beautiful overlight. And he found, it was quite a small room again. He felt, I could do a painting here. Yeah. So that's how we set it up, and we brought a sort of rather grand chair. It was on a platform. The Queen could arrive through Clarence House, so it's a sort of private way of entering.
And then he asked you to pose for him, to be the subject of his painting.
Yeah. I was very excited by that. As a painter, it was so exciting just seeing how he painted. And it was such a fascinating way. He would mix a colour and look really intensely at you, then mix it again and slightly change the tone. He would, on a very small handheld palette, he would put one or two gentle brush strokes of it on the canvas, and then he'd scrape all that paint, which he spent 5 minutes mixing, onto the wall and remix another colour just to put right next to.
This is amazing. Did you talk about the fact that the way he painted to the side, so you could see the way he painted?
Because the canvas was large for the ones on me, I could see what he was doing. If the canvases are smaller, then you're only seeing the back of the canvas. But because all the paintings he did of me pretty much were large canvases, I could always see him working on the side.
Did you like what he did of you?
I loved what he did for me, but what was so marvellous about it was when Lucian was painting, he talked a great deal, and suddenly he was going to work on your eyes or your mouth or something, and he'd go, you had to be quiet and stay still. But otherwise, you chatted away like crazy, and Lucian had a fantastic memory for poetry. I mean, he could recite masses of Keats, Shakespeare, you name it, songwriters.
So it was like a cultural reference.
Cultural reference. And then jokes and dirty jokes and limericks and God knows what. And this would come streaming out one after the other. And then we'd talk a lot of... He loved gossip, and so he'd ask me, what's happened to so-and-so? I haven't seen her recently. And then we'd get on to it. And then he'd say, shh. He didn't say it, but he just... did it like that, and you shut up, and he would work away very intently on your mouth or your eyes, and then he'd go back to humming a Cole Porter song. He knew the words of every Cole Porter song. He had fantastic memory.
Right. Let's take a look. Let me take a look at some things, and we'll talk more about that. The first slide. This is Holland Park Studio.
Yes. So this is the beginnings of the first portrait he did of me, and I'm lying on the bed, which you'll see. But he would work on a very small area of the canvas and build it up to quite a finished state.
Like the right front.
Like my cheek and my ear, and I mean the whole of the head is built up quite strongly, and then he moved along the body.
In the next photo is Queen Elizabeth II, the famous, and this is your photograph of...
Yeah, I did ask if I could take this photograph.
Now, how did that happen, the photograph of the Queen?
Well, because I would go with Lucian on each sitting to set up the easel and have everything in place and then wait for the Queen to arrive, I just plucked up enough courage to say, oh, Mum, would you mind if I took a photograph?
No, I was asking that, but also... How did the portrait of the Queen take place?
Oh, because...
Did he ask Buckingham, or did they
before he did the portrait of the Queen, he'd done a portrait of Robert Fellowes, who at the time was the Queen's secretary. Oh. And I think while Robert was sitting with Lucian, they started chatting, and they thought the idea of... Lucian always wanted to sort of paint the...
He only wanted to paint people that he liked or found interesting.
Yeah, quite. And I think it was a very quiet nod to the royal family for helping get the family in from Germany and his grandfather in from Vienna.
Next picture is Freud in 2005. There he is, him. This is a photograph you took.
Yes, with a young fox cub.
Loved dogs.
He loved dogs, but this is a wild fox that was trying to be domesticated. Yeah. Lucian's love of horses brought me around because I had my own whippet, which Lucian gave as a present. I was walking... There's a park in West London, quite close to the studio, and I noticed right in the corner of this very quiet park, there's a small stables where a nun would look after 15 ponies, horses, for disadvantaged kids. It was a sort of charity. And I suddenly thought, oh my, Lucian could... I said, could Lucian take Lucian here to show them the ponies? We could work, we could possibly work there. So we went down to meet the nun, and Lucian loved it. And we set up an easel and started painting the horses in the stables, where there was this little fox.
All right, next slide. This is him.
This is at White's Club. This is for John's celebration for Volume 3.
Was that what it was for? It was the grandest dinner ever been given for me. In White's Club,
of all a lot of grand dinners.
Very grand.
White's Club, that great room at White's Club, is one of the most beautiful rooms in London, and Lucian organised that. And it was a great occasion. Mick Jagger was there, I remember, and everybody got rather high and was rollicking all over the place, and the rather sedate atmosphere of this wonderful sedate club was somewhat disturbed.
This is a photograph of paintbrushes in 2011.
Okay, yeah.
What's that?
This is in the studio. This is how Lucian worked, and you know, I wouldn't tidy things up in any way. I let Lucian live and work how he wanted. So this is where the paint, you know, after looking for paints, it would mean scrummaging through all of this.
But you chronicled sort of the progress of the paintings too.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I just loved being around. I thought the whole world was in this one room.
Really?
I really did feel it, a great, passionate sense of place.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I could photograph everything and find it interesting.
Yeah. But would you ever photograph a painting that he left in the evening? Because he showed me at the time I was there.
Yeah.
He had a daylight studio, and then he had a studio
exactly at
totally
for night.
For night.
Yeah, he never crossed the two. If they were working under electric light, then of course the colour on the skin's completely different. Right. The way the light falls on the skin is so different. So you never mix. If you started in the day, it was always a day painting. And the same for night.
Did he ever come in the morning and just simply paint over it and just
not paint over, but he had such a strong self-edit.
Yeah.
So the paintings which would have gone on for almost a year, and then he'd go, no, it's just not working. I'm just not going to. And he would physically put his boot through it and rip them up. And
having spent so much time,
yeah, I mean, heartbreaking for Lucian more than anyone, but also for the model.
Including yourself?
No, never. No, he always had 2 or 3 goes on it before he really got going on one painting.
Yeah, he was very energetic as a painter, though. I mean, he would go for hours painting.
On his feet.
A lot of people would only go for like an hour and a half and be exhausted. You may even said that about you.
I'm like that. Yeah.
You know, and he would just go. Was Picasso like that? Could go for hours?
Picasso would go for hours and hours and hours, but in a very different way from Lucian. I mean, Picasso was much more. Picasso painted very, very quickly, and Lucian painted very, very slowly. I mean, that's an enormous difference between them. I mean, Lucian took hours and days and years to finish a painting.
But Lucian was very tense and uptight when he was painting. It was a real struggle for him. Was Picasso like that, or?
No, I think Picasso had this enormous amount of energy, and he worked very, 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 very quickly.
Yeah.
And even the most complicated pictures, it's amazing how quickly they were done. I mean, in a matter of days sometimes.
Yeah.
And he was sort of very intense working on it, and it would be amazing. You go back 3 days later and find the painting finished. Yeah. But Lucian would take it would be 6 months, 18 months before he.
But a very tight. Nervous energy in there, and if things weren't going right, which for Lucian was a lot of the time, he felt it wasn't quite how he wanted.
What was his judgment of himself?
As a painter, he knew he had a great ability. I feel any good painter has to have that confidence, but he really pushed himself to try and make something. I think he believed in a bit of magic in art.
Really? In Picasso?
I think
he just knew genius early.
Yes, Picasso, there's no doubts in Picasso's mind at all. I mean, Picasso
who was the greatest painter of all time.
Yes, and he didn't doubt, he didn't worry. I mean, he just painted away, and then another painting and another painting. I mean, there are very few paintings in which he sort of sat and looked at it for hours on end, and then made one brush stroke. I mean, Lucian would look at it for ages and then sort of just put one brush stroke on and then think about it.
But it was a very good decision which Lucian made. Having watched him, and you could see him thinking things through, and then the decision he'd made in his head and he acted upon it was always the right decision, I felt.
Yeah. Let's see the next painting here. Yeah, I love this too. Yeah.
I took this because I was sitting for a portrait, so that's what I was looking at. Yeah. And I had my camera slipped down the side of the chair, so I just took a photo of this. So that's me. That's my vision of Lucian, whilst he's looking at me.
Okay, next image. That was in 2005.
So that's the portrait he was painting when I took that photograph.
Yeah. And the last portrait he took of you?
Portrait of the Hound, it's called. Is a naked body with my dog at the side of me. Just about. Lucian felt it was there or thereabouts and didn't mind it being shown, but right at the end he just got a little bit too weak, and
it took years, that painting.
It did take, but
Literally
he's an old man, and it was pretty good.
Now, interestingly enough, you inherited a bit of money from him.
I did.
From his estate.
Yeah.
And so now you're free to paint. You're back in painting, and you've had an exhibition, I guess,
at
in
Marlborough
London,
Gallery.
at Marlborough in London.
And I keep coming over regularly to New York, which I love the town very much, and I paint over here.
But you paint mainly exteriors?
Yes, I do like sort of being within the... It's sort of plein air in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like being in an environment and soaking up that and painting.
Are you a better painter because you spent that time with Lucian?
Yes.
He's painted every corner of my garden. He comes and stays,
Stays in your house?
which I love. And he comes and stays for a week at a time, and he will have 3 or 4 paintings going at the same time. And he comes at different times of the year, so sometimes he has to sort of paint out the green leaves and turn them into autumn leaves and so on. And it's a constant change, isn't it?
Yeah, so I have started a portrait of someone in London, so this is going to be...
Oh, you are going to try a portrait?
Yeah, I'll see, yeah.
Someone you know well?
Yeah, getting to know well.
Oh.
We'll see. But it's very exciting.
Now, you think you'll be influenced by Lucian?
Yes, but not in the way... Yes,
you won't
very
copy
much.
him or try to duplicate him, but you will be influenced by him.
Yeah, very much.
He's in your head.
He is, in a good way.
Yeah. How do you think that is, that he's in your head?
We were just great friends, and just a remarkable man that had such an open acceptance of everything, and then he would make his own mind up about...
He was a seductive man, was he not?
Well, David was the most important person in Lucian's life, without any question.
Well...
Should never forget that.
He also...
Why do you think that was, John?
I think because David played an enormously important role in his work, in his art, and it somehow reinforced his enormous gifts. And one always felt that he needed David around, and David kept everything going and enabled Lucian to sort of paint as he wanted and take as much time, or he was under far less pressure because David was around. David sort of was in control of everything. Isn't that true?
Oh, well, I sort of gave him freedom, I felt. That's what I wanted to do, give him his freedom so he could paint.
So he had to worry about nothing but painting.
Exactly.
While you were there.
Yeah, that's what in my head, that's what I thought I was trying to do.
Good man. You have an exhibition now.
I do indeed.
What is it?
It's an exhibition of Picasso and the camera.
All right.
And I didn't want to do any more exhibitions of Picasso and photographs and have a lot of photographs of Picasso bang, bang, bang around a wall. Right. So I decided to see what Picasso took from the camera, how Picasso got inside the camera, the tricks he played on the camera, and how he took control of the camera. And that's what the show's about. And it's on
at the Gagosian? Where is it?
Gagosian Gallery on 21st Street. And it's on for another month.
This is really a painter's progress, is it? It's a portrait of Lucian Freud by David Dawson, who knew him as well as anyone could know him. And you see what it's in here, just an extraordinary sense of portraits of the subject and the painting. I mean, just look at this. Is this your whippet, or what is that?
Yeah, that's my whippet called
That's
Eli.
your whippet that he gave you? Eli.
Yeah, Christmas Day. 10-week-old pup.
A painter's life. We are always sort of transfixed by the life of artists, and this is a reflection of that. And John, where are you on the biography of
Well,
Picasso?
I'm still labouring with the 4th volume, but I'm getting... I've done about half of it.
Yeah. This picks it up at what, like, this is at the end of... When?
No, well, we're still in the 1930s. I mean, I'm just about to get into the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War. But it'll be... I'll live in... I'm determined to live long enough to finish it.
I certainly hope so. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.